Jim Joyce, we made it to 2025. Shot of
Yeah.
digital health therapy.
Out of digital health post JPM glow.
Yeah, CES plus JPM for me. So, and considering all the talking I had to do,
Yeah.
we're here in the new year, kicking us off. I know we missed a couple of weeks. Sorry, our loyal listeners and viewers.
Listener.
Steve said,
Listener.
yeah. And also excited for today's discussion. So this will be our, well, hold on. Before we introduce our new format, just maybe a quick thoughts, high level. I'll start with CS. Maybe you continue with JPM. Gonna pat
Yeah.
ourselves on the
How was
back.
CES, man?
We were at CES for just an amazing time with the Panasonic Well team. So we won one of the top five winners.
Yeah.
We held the big check, 125 grand. For all the entrepreneurs out there, it's non-dilutive. That's even better. So,
Bravo,
shout out
bravo,
to the
bravo.
whole Panasonic Well team again, Matt, Christy, Yoki. I can't even name all, and some of the awesome, amazing people.
Arigato.
Arigato gozaimasu. And actually, just, again, for our listeners and viewers, we kind of realized that throughout the, application process already, like we submitted, that our logo, actually, your coach logo, is based on a Japanese kanji, hito. So hito is like this, which means a person. So, and the whole
Yep.
concept of your coach was that every person needs a person to lean on. So, a
Right.
little sort of interesting that a Japanese company
And
ended up selecting us.
and just so putting in context here for our millions of listeners is so basically your coach. So you've been at this now 6 years, 7 years,
Mm,
6 years.
five. So just January kind of celebrated. I think January 3rd, we officially
Okay.
incorporated as your coach.
So
So
so the amazing Your Coach team was recognized by a Panasonic program to recognize innovation, like a challenge or something to bring innovation. And you guys were one of the leading companies or the leading company that got awarded at
yeah, so they were top
CES.
five, and we were the
Okay.
top five. So that's the story. But
Amazing.
but it's interesting, right?
Okay.
Hardware tech company recognizing that human in the loop is still important
Yeah.
to our. And so I'm actually, kind of maybe quick JPM, kind of a minute,
Yeah.
Jim. Maybe your
Cool.
perception
Yeah,
of
but
it.
yeah, I'll give my quick one. But what was the most amazing thing you saw at CES that blew you away?
Our booth, and I'll tell you why. We were
Okay.
literally,
Cool.
Marina and I, at our booth. We saw nothing else. The only time we kind of swung over to
Okay.
Venetian is for a
Okay.
panel that Marina was on. Like
So you
literally
didn't
saw
see some
nothing.
wild robot or flying,
No, and like
something.
literally
Okay.
nothing. We were in a Panasonic
Okay.
booth.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but
So we'll pass it. Okay. We'll pass it. I've
so
heard
the
these like,
highlight
we'll
was
pass on
really
that.
our
Yeah.
announcement. So, Mhm.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So JPM, just so we don't keep our guests waiting. So JPM,
Yep.
listen, I thought, and I've been reading some of the people's post write-ups on JPM. It felt different this year. There was a different vibe to it. Now, a lot of it's about the meetings, like maybe 10% smaller, but probably 20% more enthusiastic. And what it seemed to be like, I kind of toggle between going to like biotech and pharmaceutical events and
Yep.
maybe some digital health tech events. So good cross section everywhere in the research space, in the pharmaceutical space, it's AI in every research lab. It was just amazing, right? And then I think you had, lots of interactions about the whole Waymo, like, I think a lot of people really, because Waymo's really come into play where you have all these driverless cars flipping around
Every
New York
like
City, and they
third
must have
car in
amped up
San
the force.
Francisco. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So I did the drive with the Waymo, and it's like, no matter what you say, it's still like, dystopian, and then you have classically, and it seems like the funding environment to fund AI research collaborations and partnerships and looking at it. And then, my only other comment is it seemed like obesity, neuroscience,
Yep.
cognitive behavior stuff, Alzheimer's, dementia, like as kind of big conditions. It seemed to be everywhere. Seemed to be good funding, deal making environment. So, super positive. I walked away out of there kind of like
Yep.
people seemed pretty bullish,
Completely
cautiously
second
optimistic.
that.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll take our next guests today
Yeah.
view. I don't think he was there, but so without further ado, for all of our
Yeah.
listeners and viewers, we're also trying something new. New year, new us. And
Right.
not gonna do this every week just because, but we're gonna do this long kind of form podcast show where
Right.
Usually you and I kind of limited. We got so many questions, right? And we sort of go through the
Yeah.
person's history, kind of a bunch of questions, etc. We kind of get done with 40 minutes, the attention span. But I know we have 2 hours blocked. When our guest joins us, we'll caveat
Figure it
it.
out.
We'll figure it out. And if it takes
Yeah.
the full
Yeah. Yeah.
40, great. If it takes the
As soon
full
as
two,
my wife starts calling me for dinner, we
there
might
you
have to,
go.
we use that as the cutoff.
Amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Well, so with that, I'm gonna let in Jay Parkinson, and Jay and I'll be honest, I don't remember where exactly we met. Kind of the first time. It was
Yeah.
definitely in New York. I think I was running Health 2.0, and Jay was the doctor in the world. What an
Well, I
introduction,
grew up
right?
before we let you talk. I grew up watching Dr. J, so I had a different expectation coming into the. I'm sure you heard that before.
Well, give me some views for sure.
Jay, welcome to our show. You are our guinea pig because, as you know, we got done kind of pre-recording, shooting the shit with Jim as we always do, and this is our first trial to do a long form
A longer
podcast
combo.
show. We
Wow.
usually
Yeah.
kind of run through stuff, history, etc., and we never get to
Boom, boom,
dive
boom.
deep into the discussion. Now, we might get bored, all of us, and say, "Hey, 40 minutes is good, done. Keep
Like-
going for the full 2 hours or
Like,
whatever."
like
So,
I'm at the age where sometimes you just get bored and walk off. And it's no one's fault.
Especially when you're talking about yourself for 2 hours. And high probability,
Yeah.
you know?
well, I hope you like standing. Welcome, and maybe for all millions of listeners, viewers, just give us background, introduction. Where you were born.
Who is Dr.
However
J?
you want to take it, and then we always interrupt. And this time we can actually go deeper into whatever we want to go into. So.
Sure.
Sure. All right. Well, yeah, Jay Parkinson, 48, almost 49-year-old male. I grew up in St. Charles, Missouri.
What
Yeah,
month is your birthday? You don't need to disclose
February
the date.
4th, coming up.
Oh, okay, it's
Couple
coming
days.
up.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll be 49 in May 12th.
Really?
So
Yeah.
That's
For
right.
some of your,
I'm
your
jealous of
contemporary
both of
hackers
your
now.
hair.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it was kind of interesting. My family's lovely people and, grew up just with like a dirt bike and a bunch of land, so my parents, my mom had like a little, like one of those triangles she would ring when dinner was ready, and hear it from like, a mile away. Yeah. And so she could call us home that way and, we'd come in and I was always an independent guy, I could just kind of like go off and do whatever I wanted. And so I think that was kind of like the beginning. And like my parents, I don't think had a, vision to like, be like, oh, he needs to be an independent entrepreneur guy. But that was kind of like, I was just taking care of myself, when I was out and about, just, So yeah, that was kind of like the beginning of me just being like, hey, I can build stuff,
Right.
But
And
quick
how, like,
comment there.
your neighbor was like a mile away, or was it like a half a mile?
No, I mean, it's probably like 400 yards though, but like
Okay.
right yard, I was able to, that's how I learned how to play golf. I set up like a whole other golf course up in the front yard. So,
Cool.
But I was gonna say that also means that you kind of earned your parents' trust, right? To kind of do whatever you want and sort of experiment, for lack of a better term, whether it's setting up the golf
Right.
course in your
Yeah.
backyard or whatever.
Or lighting butterflies on fire or whatever you're doing.
yeah, right. Exactly. Right. But that's the interesting thing. My parents never gave me any advice whatsoever. They were never like, you should do this. They were always like, hey, son, what do you want to do? And we talk it out and they're
Right.
like, you got your back, and so
Sounds
it's
good.
kind of an interesting like approach because then you're like, well, if you screw it up, like it's on you and like you learn from it. It's like you're not your parent,
Right. Right.
That's pretty cool.
I
Great.
have a Jewish mother, so that doesn't.
That doesn't work out. That doesn't work out. Yeah. No, I had more of the J environment. Was just like, hey, keep yourself alive. Be home by dinner's at 6 if you make it.
Yeah. Wow. It's great though. I mean, that to me, like I would love to kind of raise kids like that, again, like it's a different era though, now there's like the
Mhm.
little kid type of thing. And, like everybody's worried
Right.
about,
Yeah.
it gets stolen and all the bad things in the world happening. But like, I think we survived. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like,
What
wait,
doesn't kill
exactly.
you makes you stronger, right? So
Yeah. Totally. Totally.
So from there,
Yeah. So from there, I went to, it was interesting though. My high school and everything it's very, well, gosh, I mean, I think majority of my high school, like, is still living in the same small town, so I didn't really know that you could get out. Right. And I had a business teacher. It was the only business course I ever took to this day, which is where I think it was like 10th grade. She and the other business teacher in the school who were having an affair. But anyway, they took about like 20 of us to New York City. This is like
right,
1992. And I was just
to
like,
facilitate the affair, or
yeah, I know, right? Well, I think the lyrics.
probably.
Why not? No names though. But anyway, yeah, that was like the first time I was just like, wow, like the world is a creative, awesome place. They, kind of arranged all these meetings with like fashion designers and things like that. And so a little like hillbilly kid from Missouri seeing that stuff was just like, the world's a big place. And so I think that was the reason why I was like, I'm gonna end up in New York someday, you know? Yeah.
okay,
So, and between that though, I stayed in St. Louis and at WashU for undergrad. I had a golf scholarship to a bunch of
Hmm.
places. I was really good. If anybody plays golf, you know?
right,
See, the entrepreneur was in you.
the
You
front
set
yard.
up this thing in your backyard and you started
Yeah.
teaching yourself and just hacking away at it, right? And then there you
100%.
go, scholarship.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It's interesting. Golf's a fascinating sport because it's like not a team sport, even though there's like a golf team in high school, it's you're on your own. And so like
Right.
it also like I thought a lot about how like I wish I had more like team-based sort of skills. And I think like kids, played sports, like I think really helps that. And so, you know,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah, yeah.
opportunity there.
I also think golf, like when you ultimately will go into medicine, I think there's this whole idea of like watching golfers, like that they just, the way they contort their body, like the way the motion and the physics of it work. And then you can have like smaller guys, like hit the ball twice as far as a bigger guy. I think it's kind of
Really.
a fascinating, space that way. It's very technical.
Well, and it's super technical. And the interesting thing was like, this is when I started playing, this is the era of like, I don't know if you guys know any golfers, but like they weren't in shape back then, I mean, they had like,
Right, right.
they were pros,
What was his name? What was his name? John
I mean,
Daly? Was it John Daly?
John Daly, Craig Stanley or
Like
something like that.
cigarette and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's kind of a funny little thing. It wasn't like nowadays, they're athletes, so it's a different vibe.
right.
But like, Tiger Woods and I are the same age, so we played in some of the same tournaments. And yeah, he kicked my ass, of course, but like, but my lowest score was in a tournament was 62. So 10 under par, with 2 bogeys that day. And so like I was a good player, you
And
know?
can you remember like the exact moment, like hitting those strokes like it was yesterday, or is it just kind of foggy?
No, no, for sure. Those are like some of my fondest memories.
Yeah, yeah. But they say about like I played, and I'll leave the guilty unnamed here, but a pharmaceutical company sponsored me to play 3 holes with Tiger Woods' coach.
Oh, cool.
And it was like, yes, it was like it was back in the day, like this is way back in the Wayback Machine. But pharma had a lot of resources for those kind of things. And he was telling me stories kind of like about just the sheer physical capacity of Tiger Woods, that he would like swing with such torque that his like ribs
Yeah,
would pop out. He knew how to pop them in.
right. Oh,
Damn.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, he's a badass, Also, just so I can't wait for like the documentary to come out. That's like just sort of like the story of like how he went from like number one to kind of like album,
Yeah. Right.
It's such a mind game. I mean, that's all any professional sport is. It's
Yep.
just like it's out here. Like the difference between, number
Right.
one, number 100 is because like number one can control up here.
Well, listen,
Like,
mind over body is, like we kind of take that statement for granted, but when it comes
mhm,
to, I mean, I guess any physical activity, but, you know, high stakes sports, I mean, for sure.
yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting to be like, I don't know, as a young kid, kind of have, I don't know, some natural ability. We ended up moving to a golf course. So from 8th grade on, it was like the first hole was my backyard. So that was cool. But to be able to like kind of like go up in like the kind of like rankings or just, know that you're like, oh, I'm like one of the top few thousand. in the world, basically, so
Right.
that was
Yeah, that's fascinating. Probably it's informative, right?
Up
yeah,
0.1%, Jay. Keep
yeah, yeah.
going.
But it's also like,
Right.
it's the thing where it's like, hey, it tells you like if you work hard, you can be something great, so that wasn't,
Right.
that's probably one of those early foundational things, then
Maybe you're worried about like some people like kind of peak early in life and they're still talking about their golf at age 48 or something, right?
well, that was after definitely that was definitely the decision I had to make, right? Like stay in golf or go to med school. Yeah. Or
Right.
go to doctor. Yeah. So
Um,
that's not what I wanted to be.
so you got golf scholarship.
Yeah. I went to the sort of best one I had off grid was Duke. So that was cool. But I didn't go there. Ended up staying in WashU. WashU was like in St. Louis. I was in love with my high school sweetheart, eventually married. And so stuck around. But we're not married.
Excellent.
But
And what?
yes, we're not married anymore, but still like interestingly enough, best friends. So it's she's remarried and I'm repartnered and all that stuff. So like there's all that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's always
very
when it's
nice.
amicable and
Oh,
more
yeah.
sounds like
Yeah.
more than, which is great.
Yeah.
So sponsored by golf, inspired by love, you end up at WashU.
Yeah. Because, from this like kind of hillbilly high school to there, it was like a night and day difference. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it was
Yeah.
like be challenged,
Yeah. Yeah. And WashU, like, have you been there, Eugene? Like, that's because I go there because like
No.
Cigna, like all this Cigna Express Scripts, all that around there kind of own that area, right? Like it's
Yeah,
kind of a,
my Express Scripts days were very limited, and I was abroad already
right.
when Express Scripts acquired
When it
them.
happened.
So
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
really ventured there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So,
So yeah, I went to WashU. Ended up like just barely getting into medical school, but as long as you get in, you get in. So got into Penn State and lived in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where it's like chocolate and cow manure mix. You know what I'm saying? It's good smell. And so I lived there for 4 years.
Did you acquire a sugar addiction while there or no?
Nah, only a little bit. So yeah. Then
yeah, it was,
yeah.
they always said like Hershey, Pennsylvania. Like, what was they had the ride that was in Hershey, Pennsylvania, because that was like the poor man's Florida. That was like my father. We would drive from Boston. You didn't want to go all the way. You bring us to an amusement park. It's like, we'll bring you to Hershey Park and then we'll go stay with the the Amish people in the area.
And ate them Scrabble, and like, it was fine. I was like happy to get out of there though, but med school was weird though, because, I don't know, it was probably like fourth year that I was like, my God, I don't think I like this,
Okay.
and I don't think I like,
Medicine or the
yeah,
school.
I'm like, I don't think I know medicine. I'm like, I don't think I could do this practicing for the rest of my life,
Okay.
and I got really confused and, there's the match, right? And I interviewed at all these like radiology residencies. And at the final moment, I was just like, I can't sit in a dark room the rest of my life. And
Right.
so in the meantime, do you guys know Bon Ku?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
He's very much like he's popular in the space, more about like design and medicine. But
Okay.
he was a year ahead of me and he introduced me to a guy who was like, you should check out Preventive Medicine. And so I went out
Yeah.
and did a rotation at Hopkins in preventive medicine. And I was like, this is what I can do with my life.
Got it.
So yeah.
Can we double click what that means from even a curriculum perspective? Because even today, you don't hear many docs going in preventative, even though we've been talking for decades about prevention, right? And we've been, and we've so much focused on sick care, which I know you're passionate about. So can we just kind of like, how many of these
What
preventative
is it?
medicine programs, like what is it?
What
Yeah.
is it?
It's one of the 29 specialties. I mean, I think I would say probably 50 docs a year complete a residency. It's, the best way to describe it, it's a little bit of a misnomer. And, traditional residencies are about one-on-one interactions, patient. Preventive medicine is more systems thinking. So whenever you graduate, a lot of folks become sort of leaders of like the local public health department or, federal agencies, a lot of federal agencies. So part of preventive medicine residency, you get your master public health.
And I
And
guess population health management ish.
yeah,
I'm not in
population
the,
ability. Yeah.
yeah.
So you take a bunch of like stats courses and just epidemiology and, just you really
Yep.
kind of understand what it's like to manage the health population bit.
Kind of
So
Fauci.
Hmm.
but interesting though, right? Because we all know at the end of the day, n equals one, right? And every one of us is unique. So my expectation was that preventative medicine as a program would focus on things like lifestyle, the food is
Yep.
medicine,
Yeah.
just broadly nutrition,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try to
you
prevent
know,
people from shit.
And that's why it's a little bit misnomer. It's like, I think it should be like renamed because, yeah, and that's kind of functional slash integrative medicine. They kind of own that
Right.
realm. But preventive medicine, yeah, it's more just like population health management. And
Right.
it's,
s-
yeah.
since you brought it up, right? Because I mean, we have people that have been kind of talking about functional medicine, like Mark Hyman. I'm sure you know many
uh,
others, right? And I don't know. Again, I'm looking from the outside. There always has been this, well, traditional medicine, functional medicine, and the two, a lot of times kind of like this. That's my observation. I don't know if it's the right observation, and why is that, right? Just curious, your thoughts on it.
Well, I think docs are very like adamant about, hey, pills and scalpels are the only way to go. I think I read this stat a while ago that like in all of med school, you get about 19 hours of education and nutrition, you know, and
Right.
most of that is like if somebody's hospitalized, like how do you feed them? And
Call the nurse to get a nutritional infusion.
and so like we just kind of dropped the ball, I think, on like all things health
Yeah.
versus, and we kind of own medical. Medical
Right.
pills, scalpels, clinics, insurance. And so I think that we're like, when it comes to health, I think that we're supposed to be known as that. And when some jackass comes along and says, well, I'm the expert in that now, I think it's super threatening
Right.
to our ego, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's fundamentally like the people we train in medicine, like, like you didn't win a golf game because you weren't competitive. Like you were competitive, right? So you wanted to win. So like in medicine, you're just like, okay, now, whatever moniker you end up with. Like I always find it fascinating when I'm working with clinicians that, they're competitive in different ways. It could be competitive because they think their field is more important or more influential or has more opportunity, or could they think it's harder?
Yeah.
Because, I suffer more as a gastroenterologist than the guy that does rheumatology or whatever. Or, they have all this competition on multiple levels. I don't know if it's still the case, but that feels sometimes from the outside.
Yeah. Well, it's also like, I think it's fascinating. I've thought a lot about this because it's gotten myself in trouble and I also see it in others, which is like, why do doctors have such big egos? You know, and why do they have such opinions? You know, and I think it's like, I got pulled into the principal's office in medical school too much because I was always like asking the why questions, right? Like, why are we doing it this way? And it was a kind of I would say like an unspoken systemic kind of like slap of the wrist to be like, don't ask questions. But I've
And you
always
were
been
like,
in,
why can't you guys be more like my parents? Just let
yeah,
us be.
just let me be.
Right.
But like, you
Right.
can't have doctors questioning
And I wanted
everything.
to put a golf course out there
Yeah.
and they're
Oh,
never
yeah.
going to let me put a golf course.
Totally. So I think from day one, they're teaching you that your opinion is life and death. And if
Mm,
your opinion is based on just whims rather than science, you're going to kill people. And so
okay.
that to me is like the reason why we're so dug in. And it often, like when you're building products and when you're building companies, things like that, it's really hard to have doctors kind of in leadership positions because it just turns into a nightmare most of the time, you know?
Yeah, they're kind of they're in some ways compensated, or not. I mean, compensate is the right word, but they're in society. They're held up to say, okay, you deliver a confident, grounded opinion. That's your job.
You have to.
Yeah, you walk in like, I think something's wrong with me. What could it be? It could be
Mm.
these three things. I think it's this one. It's kind of like, and that's it, right?
And your decision may be the difference between somebody dying and not, or somebody getting help you. Right? And so,
Right.
it's not only the education, but it's also like what patients expect of you. Like nobody wants to go to an indecisive doctor. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
In a car crash, you go,
I don't know what to do.
"You here. You should."
It's up to you.
Right. And I also think it's like you're trained also, it's in some ways it's kind of funky training because you're trained on dealing with the paucity of information, right? So you're gonna meet me for 7 minutes, probably have limited information and contextualize whatever condition I'm walking in with, how I'm reporting it, and then you're gonna give this confident decision, about what we do next, right? So you fundamentally have to work in the art of the unknown, right?
100%. 100%. And like, that's something that I think I didn't realize in the early days of my, sort of entrepreneurship, but have had to unlearn 100% because you have to kind of like, you know, and I still suffer with this, right? And it's like, to work with teams, to build companies, to build products and things like that. Like you can't be the person that's just like, what's my way or the highway, you know?
Mm,
It's something like, I think every doc who wants to kind of like not practice clinical medicine and work with teams, it's just like, it's so foreign, you know?
right. Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I learned that because I always think as like Eugene, you're a multiple time entrepreneurs here. Like I actually found that as I got older, I'd be like, hey, my instincts are telling me this, and let's just go do that. You know what I mean? Like, so, you would validate in your own way, and you would look for trusted advisors, you look for people that could appropriately challenge you, but you kind of had to go with your instincts on things. Like, you sat there because you would just be like, okay, for some reason I'm telling you, this feels like the right decision. We got to move, which feels very doctor-like in some ways.
I
Yeah.
still
It
remember
is.
actually in business school, there was this hedge fund guy, and one of the things he said that leadership is, part self-confidence and part self-doubt. And depending on the decision you have to make, you have to turn up one versus the
Right.
other, right? Which I always thought like that resonated. And I don't remember any of the other shit in that class, but there's like
Yeah.
always the one statement, or one
Yeah.
nugget that I would take away, and that was the one, right? Like, and you just got to judge what decision are you making, right? And how, is it reversible or irreversible, right? So,
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities, like the life and death of the company, versus the patient, right?
Right.
That's
do you keep resuscitating it,
right.
right?
But the disconnect for me, and it kind of like I think it's a fundamental. I was reading your blog this evening. It was awesome. Your designing your next life, but like is I feel
Jim
like
actually did his homework a
doctors.
little bit, so
Yeah, yeah, which
impressed,
is on
Jim.
Eugene. But yeah,
Yeah.
but like I always felt like clinicians, right? Clinicians, because like the reason you didn't want to go into radiology because or this kind of transactional interaction with someone was I always thought the challenge was that they couldn't go deep. So if I walked in with a problem, you couldn't really go deep with me. You had to do a 15-minute appointment and, go to the next person where, so your actual ability to apply any intellectual rigor or depth to the situation to kind of actually help me with my healthcare more than that transaction, like how do we stem the bleeding, kind of like in my arm's falling off and put it back on. And I always felt like VCs a little bit like similarly is they transact over their decision making, right? Like it's a transaction, right? Like, meaning I got to go meet, I'm going to go to JPM. I'm going to have 150 meetings over 4 days. Like have 4 days, right? And okay, you can't go deep, like, in those, and I felt like doctors and VCs were kind of similar. They could do something, just transact, they could just emotionally go to the next one, next one, next one.
Yeah. Yeah. We could move on to the topic VCs. Yeah.
We
Okay.
can. I mean, there's no, that's the beauty of this. We can go whatever angles. We'll continue on the roadmap of
Yeah, no
journey,
life.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's go today.
but actually, you know what? Maybe it is worth pausing on the VCs because I think you have some lessons learned through that journey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's. I'm sure we'll come back to it. I'm gonna
Yeah.
be.
If you don't mind, let's come back to that because I kind of I thought the conversation around like preventive medicine and public health and all that stuff was interesting because of like, I don't know, the things that I learned in that resident were something that like I never would have learned anywhere else,
Okay.
So, for example, I got to work. So the preventive medicine residency was fascinating because the first year was getting a master's in public health and doing some like, minor stuff. The second year is like rotations.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
and Hopkins was the biggest preventive medicine residency by far. I think we had about like 16 in our class, but now it's like 3 or something like that.
Wow.
But anyway, so they had really awesome connections with various groups at Hopkins as well as DC. So I think my first rotation was with Ralph Nader at, and again, in Sydney Wolf ran his health consumer watchdog group. Weirdly enough, Public Citizen is the only like institution in America that's full-time watchdog for the pharmaceutical industry.
Hmm.
You know,
Oh, wow.
Every-
Yeah.
other than that, it's like passive, kind of doctors are hopefully reporting bad stuff that happens once a drug goes to market. And so, we actually got, my job was to like sit through the data and find things that were kind of like post-market, like weird things that were happening in drugs. And like Cipro and like that class of medications,
Hmm.
they have a weird tendency to just like snap Achilles tendons like 24 hours after popping Cipro, and it's like
Really?
it's very common,
Superflex,
So you just like,
Superflexin, the antibiotic.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that class of antibiotics,
Jay, what
Well,
what year was that? Just roughly?
gosh, 2006.
Okay. I'm just
Right.
thinking, like, even for you, so your residency was, and just for our listeners, Ralph Nader Consumer Protection Agency, right? Just, I want to
Yeah.
level
So it was
set.
like
Okay.
a 2 month, it was a 2 month rotation with that group. So yeah, my job was to petition the FDA, right? Petition the FDA to be like, hey, you should put a black box warning on Cipro and the fluoroquinolones because,
In all the fluoroquinolones. Yeah.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
at the same time, I was launching I think it's going to be ceftabutone.
Cipro?
We had one. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, no, we had we had an antibiotic in the space for so many years ago, back in the day. But okay, so had this strange,
Yeah.
you picked up this
Yeah.
data.
And then the second one that I wrote was the third generation oral contraceptives causing blood clots.
Mhm.
And so
Okay.
what was interesting about that was in the UK, they actually had that scare about a year prior. And so there was an issue there because the media went wild and said, women who are taking third generation oral contraceptives, a huge increased risk of blood clots and women are dying. So they all stopped taking them. And then the population, like pregnancy skyrocketed. And then, there were more issues around blood clot in pregnancy versus blood clot in oral contraceptives. And so
Okay.
the kind of a lesson in like how you communicate en masse to a population, So
Okay.
we wanted to like do the same thing here in America, but not make that mistake that the UK made. And so I wrote a petition to the FDA to also get a black box warning on third generation contraceptives and blood clots. So that was, I remember like 4 months after I left that rotation, it was like, front page of the Wall Street Journal because it was like a big news because it's
Yeah, of
very
course.
to take that. So it was so cool to be like, I wrote that and I heard this
Yeah.
doctor bitch,
Right.
and the guy doc complaining about this. And I was just like, I just shut my mouth because I'm like, well, that was because
Right.
so it's really interesting to be like, well, you can do it. Visual, something that gets in the news.
Well, and
Mm.
and positively impact lives of some of these people, right? Whether they were on Cipro or were going to be on Cipro, and just have that label in front of the doc, right? Just as a warning.
And also
Right. But a kid.
position the warning, right? It's you can't be like, hey, if you don't stop taking your oral contraceptive, you're going to get pregnant and then get blood clots. Just switch to another one, like that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
also just like,
But so
hey,
yeah, what's so interesting, Jay, is like, so I, was building my career up inside the pharmaceutical industry, and I was actually it wasn't in the marketing or sales side at the time. And in everyone I worked with, the thousands and thousands of employees, careers were fundamentally made by our competitor getting a black box.
yeah,
So,
just-
so we were, we were launching at the time, it was Sherpaa, we had Claritin, and histamine, and Pfizer's Allegra got a black box. And so they were the lead product in the marketplace. They had a non-drowsy histamine in this marketplace. And so we kind of all of a sudden, we were like the third or second or, but like a little distant. And all of a sudden, boom, Clarendon became a, global blockbuster. And almost all of my pharmaceutical career, everyone I know, all these people rose to prominence around the industry. Now they're CEOs of biotech everywhere. And I would attribute like 90% of that to Pfizer getting a black box. So your consequence
Interesting.
of like, like the dynamic in it, because you can't sell an antihistamine with a black box on it. Like, it just isn't. And then the binary impact that has on, all this apparatus and industry that goes around and the distribution of that. Because why would anyone take a risk of a black box warning to put an antihistamine if there's an alternative, right? If there's,
Totally. And that's fascinating. Like the process of like creating those black box warnings and like the impact it has on the economics. They're important at the same time. It's like there's no like sometimes
100%.
like, things don't get picked up in clinical trials versus on the just the wide population. So it's
Yeah.
pretty cool the work that they're doing. And continue.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need it. We need it.
Well, it's interesting. I never thought of, when you describe preventative medicine, more of population health. And obviously we all know population health is important, but it's like didn't connect the dots to the output of
Yeah.
somebody who's
Right.
gone through a preventative medicine program. Right. So
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't an accident. It was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal because of the spill on effect of the industry and how medicines lead and this and, there's so many knock-on effects you can't even calculate it.
100%.
I just can't believe it. I mean, you mentioned, 50 people gone through, right? I feel like when you have 300 plus million people in US and only, 50 docs graduate, if that now, right, in preventative medicine, it's crazy to me. Like I feel like we need
Maybe
more.
more.
I have
Things, especially now that like, in the past, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for population health because it depends so much on data.
data, yeah.
Depends,
Yeah.
Right.
right? So, whenever you're dealing with like, paper notes, right? It's like, well, you just kind of make one weird decision. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's like the foundation you need to be able to like build systems that are
Right.
database, you know? So yeah,
It it became kind of sexy, with with all the COVID, and this everyone knew what epidemiology was. And everyone knew what this, and everyone, that was the caught in, career path.
hmm and being able to like as a doc train and stuff, kind of understand like the
Yeah.
issue like Fauci was facing, for example, where it's like, you got to make decisions with limited data, and just feeling for him because it's like, poor guy, took so many
Well,
hits.
I'm
It's
glad
true.
Joe Biden pardoned him on his way out, even though he didn't do anything wrong. So
Totally. Totally. It's sad, but it's also been really like the last, few years have been sad because, that's true. Like anytime you criticize public health, like, I mean, there's so much heart in it for a population and it's messy and treating populations is you're going to have bad things happen with vaccines, but you're also going to have great things happen. And
Right.
it's just like it's a no-win situation. It's just all about messaging and communication. And like, if anything, Fauci did was like, he didn't do the best job communicating to everyone.
Yeah. It's like constant trade-offs, right? It's constant trade-offs of decision making. Yeah. And like, what do you communicate? So, okay. So then I want to get into, so from public health, then did you practice as a clinician, or what happened next?
Well, one more. We're going to talk about one more.
we got time.
Rotation.
That's the
Health.
beauty of
I
this.
know,
We're
yeah.
not in a
so
rush.
much. Oh my God. It was with the guy, Peter Prognos. And he kind of became my mentor at Hopkins. If you guys know his name, he's the one that created the surgical checklist. Right.
Okay.
And, Atul one day wrote, the checklist manifesto. And it was about, that book was about, the challenges around getting doctors to do anything different. Right. And the surgical checklist, if you guys remember, it was like, hey, let's have a checklist so we don't amputate the right leg. Let's amputate the left leg. Let's do all these things so that catastrophic happen. And so, so basically what he taught me was like, everything is a process and you got to design the process.
It-
And if you don't design the process, it'll design itself,
Right.
which
Right.
to me is like the definition of American healthcare in a lot of ways, or just healthcare in general.
Right.
And
Right.
so that was that, like, all right, like, let's sit down and think about what we want, how we want people to behave, and how do we get them to do that.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because in kind of the design thinking approaches, and sort of the big famous picture that shows up in my head is where people think that somebody needs it and they design these roads, and then you see in the park where people make their own path just because it's better, quicker, shorter, whatever, right? So it's actually kind of interesting, right? From a medical perspective, how do we make sure that people do what they want to do versus people just going to do what they do, right? And the
it's
human behavior
Right.
factor.
100%. And that's it. It's like, it just, because like, design in healthcare wasn't really a thing. I think IDEO at the time was probably just starting to get into
Yeah.
this stuff, but yeah, healthcare was never like a design problem. It was just like, leave us alone. We're perfect already. So we don't need to be this.
But a checklist is fundamental. It's a process, right? It's like, hey, the first thing I do is check this. Do I know your name? Or do I registered you? Do I know what you're here for? Do I
Well, look,
know
a
which
lot
leg
of
I'm going
times
to
I always
amputate?
heard the comparison of, kind of doctors to pilots, especially surgical docs, right? Like there's a checklist and, this is how we need to do
Right.
this, right? Because otherwise, XYZ will happen. So I mean, I get it on a surgical side of things for sure.
Yeah, like there's no chance I'm leaving the house. Like I left for vacation to go skiing, and my wife gave a checklist of closing down the house and what I had to bring in terms of gifts. And like without a checklist, there was no chance. There was no chance. There was no chance it was gonna be a happy vacation.
Man, if I need to run out, get more than two things, I need a checklist.
That's
Yeah. Exactly. Apple notes, guys. That's like
Yeah,
the best in the world.
absolutely.
Shared
yeah,
Apple
no,
notes.
and it's evidence. Like, no, I checked it. I remember, like, here's a small caveat. Since there is me and my brother, Thanksgiving, last minute preparation. My mother needed some final ingredients for Thanksgiving. She gives us a list, and we come back and we bought all the things, and then she comes back and she's like, "What do you mean? Where is the?" And she was looking for margarine. Where is the margarine? And we went there, and my brother and I, we had the list, and we were, trained, men in the family, lots of women. We knew that we were in trouble if we didn't get this thing perfectly. And we say, well, hang on a second. It wasn't on the list. And we take out the list, and the whole family stays at the list. And my mother's name is Maureen. And she looks, she goes, it's right there. And we're like, oh, we thought you signed the list. Maureen Margaret. They're like, you idiots. You thought we signed the list.
Good
Well,
excuse.
that was a sign, right? Yeah.
Anyway, back to the
Yeah, back to the storyline.
Yeah, no,
It's
yeah. So, I thought that was like literally like the beginning of like, hey, design is a thing, you know? I
okay.
also remember having a book in college. It was like, I tried to find this book forever. It's just old, I think, but it was just called Designing Healthy Cities. And it was this thing. It was like, well, if Atlanta is not designed, right? Denver isn't designed, but a lot of those cities in Europe are kind of designed for, no cars, public transportation, like, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. So it was kind of like an analysis of that. So it was, it's kind of, those are the early days of me being like, oh, design is a thing that like I should now start like reading up on, you know?
Yep.
And I noticed, you take a lot of photos, right?
Mhm.
And you've probably said the word design through the first, wow, 40 minutes already. Time flies.
Yeah.
Bunch of times. Do you think that's part of your DNA, or this is a developed thing?
Or is it because
Uh,
you live in Williamsburg?
yeah.
Well,
Used to.
did, right?
Oh, you used to. Okay.
I see the
Oh, yeah.
snow
Okay.
and I'm like, brr. I mean, there's
Okay.
snow in Williamsburg now too, probably, but
Probably. Yeah, designing, like, I've always sort of loved just kind of beautiful things. Like, I've always loved clothes. I've always, like, loved to, like, one quote I wrote about yesterday, which is like, life is art. Everything you do is art, and like,
Mm.
kind of stumbled across that like a year or two ago. And that resonates a lot. And,
Sure.
design to me is just, making things full on easy and elegant. And yeah, I think it's if in an alternate world, I probably would have gone that route. But,
Y-
didn't
It's
like
never too late.
desert middle of nowhere, you just didn't kind of get exposed to that, you know?
Who do we have on that did a whole thing on health artists? Who was the,
I think it was Gautam Gulati, if
yeah,
I'm
it's
not
Gautam. It was
mistaken.
Gautam.
Yeah,
Remember, I tried
Yeah.
to take credit for that, and he got all.
yeah,
So I was
yeah.
like, "Oh, health artists, that were
The
health
health
artists."
artist, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's I don't know. I guess it's just part of my DNA. I like beautiful things and easy things, Yeah.
Okay.
Um, but the wild thing is, so like that was cool, the rotation with Peter Provenance was
Peter, yep.
awesome. And then,
I
you
like how
know,
Jay brings us back, not us bringing him back. Love this. You're doing all the hard work,
Yeah.
speaking and moderating us. So
We just little chess pieces.
yeah. So back to Peter.
I know, right? But no, like the residency was kind of winding down. It was over like June 30th, 2007. But what was weird was, June 29th, 2007, the iPhone came out. And I was just like, we all kind of, we're old enough to remember what it was like when
Yeah.
an iPhone, there's browser in your pocket, and that was the big deal. And I've always been a nerd. I've always been kind of like, I'm tech dork. And so I, learned in, you know, like in residency that like costs are kind of all over the place. And this is pre-Obamacare. So like people had to spend a bunch of money if they weren't uninsured. And a lot of kids in Williamsburg, Brooklyn were uninsured at the time. Probably still are. And so, yeah, I had this idea to be like, hey, I don't have any, I mean, zero money. That's coming off a $15,000 salary because it's a privilege to go to Hopkins, right? And didn't have any money. So moved back to New York. I lived with these two women in like a tiny bedroom and started a practice that was powered by my iPhone.
Mm.
And, you know,
And when you say
I was just,
practice, sorry, primary care
yeah, it
or
was,
like
Keith is interesting. It officially kind of goes up to 26. And whenever you think about, even gosh, until you're probably 40, the like profiles, the disease profiles that you get look more pediatric than they do geriatric,
hmm,
you know?
Yeah.
So my pediatric training, I was like, well, hey, I'm going to go back and treat like these, 20 something kids of Williamsburg who are uninsured and, created my own website, kind of told the world like, hey, I'm a new kind of doc. I communicate the way you do. You make an appointment. Google like a month before allows you to embed a calendar. So you could see my calendar and you could just, click your time. And then I could hack that to be like, okay, it brings up a form and you can like answer a few questions. What's your address? What are your symptoms? What's going on? And that would just send an alert to my iPhone that I had a new patient, you know? And
Okay.
I do a house call. I kept it, but you had to be living within these certain zip codes. So that was just part of it.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And then it's just like, well, how do you get patients? How do
Okay.
people know about it? You don't have a story,
How do you get?
you know?
How do you get them?
Well, back in my peace residency, I did that in New York City, 2002, 2005. I was the health writer for Gothamist and Gawker. And so
Okay.
that was like, back to my photography, it was the era of the photo blog. It was like you had a blog, but it was just a photo a day, basically. And so photography just kind of kept me alive in residency, just like street photography in New York City. So I got in with that crowd and that was like early internet stuff. This is like 2002, like meetups and be like, let's talk about how we're hand coding our photo blog and like, what equipment we're using, that kind of thing.
Mm.
So there was like this scene in New York of like this, art photo blog type of person. And so that was like, I was part of that. And like the editor of Gothamist, who, was a pioneer of like media journalism via blog. Uh, I was tight with him because of that. So anyway, like the New York City media knew me because I was like the writer for them. And when I
Right.
launched the practice, Gawker, which was very influential at the time,
Yeah.
uh,
Sure.
2 stories on me that day. And
Okay.
Gawker was interesting. Their strategy was to cover the media journalists
Am I bringing you back, Jay? For
It's
the ones that are just listening, this is from Web Archives from 2008. So I gave you a little time to do, redesigns basically. This is it?
I mean, that's how that wasn't my practice though. My practice
No?
was, gosh, if you could go to Jay Parkinson MD back in like probably December
Okay,
2007,
okay. I'll
that
go
would
back.
probably be the
Keep
one.
going. I'm sorry if I got it
No, that's
wrong.
okay. Yeah. So anyway, the media knew about me. Gawker's strategy was to sort of cover journalists, like they're kind of celebrities. So the journalists all read Gawker to be like, what's Gawker saying about me? And so that was really genius. So anyway, point is, because the media read Gawker, like the media then wanted to do stories about me, like, the Fox News, CNN, News at the
Right.
time. So anyway, Seth Godin found out about me, blew me off with his blog. So in the first month, I got like 7.5 million hits on my site, you know?
Okay.
So it kind of went viral. And that
Yeah.
kind of off everything, honestly. They usually once you just brought up,
Picked it on.
Yeah, it's I'm sorry the web archive machine is blanking out on you.
doesn't go back that far.
No, it's not loading. So, we can
So that
that'll be
drove
fun.
a ton of patients into your practice.
Yeah, exactly. And then it was just like the sort of baristas at the coffee shop. But it was also really cool too, because like some of my favorite like musicians who lived in Williamsburg, I remember I was meeting Christopher Parks, right? He started St. Healthcare, right? He and under that before there was like him and Robert, the co-founders, and like we were, having lunch, and like literally one of my favorite musicians like emails me on like out of the blue, and it's like, I'm going on tour. Can you please come see me? You know,
Right.
you know,
Right.
dropped everything, of course. So
Right.
it was interesting. A lot of like, Williamsburg was very much the epicenter of like sort of exporting cool, and creating cool,
Right.
and so those were
Yeah.
like, did that for like 6 months.
And
Okay.
most of your patients were private pay.
Yeah, I mean, it was like
Yeah.
I had overhead, so it was like I charged like $150 for a house
Yeah.
call,
Yeah.
like,
And when you say house call, was this literally house call or was this like you would
Virtual.
I'm trying to remember when like FaceTime on that iPhone was working, right? And, like,
no,
it
wasn't a
wasn't yet,
thing.
right? It wasn't
No,
a thing.
never.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was literally a house call, just going.
Yeah.
So it was very cool too, because like, you get to see people's homes in New York City. Like, it's just
Yeah.
So you
very
can
like,
intake the social determinants of health firsthand, right? Just by like showing up,
Right.
like, hey, I'm eating right, but then there's like 27, bags of chips in the back or something.
100%.
And were you prescribing Cipro?
Wait, this.
Or the contraception or
No, but it was cool just because it was like, I also had like price lists of like, hey, if you need an X-ray, I'm gonna send you to this one radiologist, and like they would just be like, oh, this is a Jay Parkinson patient, cash pay, and it's like, $60 for an
it's
X-ray.
gonna cost.
Yeah,
Okay, awesome. So like a navigation from you, cough, cold, lung,
Yeah.
small injury. Where do I go? Yeah. Would you see 10 patients a day?
I mean, not even like I was just.
Not even.
It's interesting because like the majority of my time was spent doing like interviews and being on TV and moving and quality show people that wanted to make a reality show with this,
Yeah.
one. And so, yeah, I mean, there are movie offers or book offers. It was just wild. I was like, that's
Wow.
not what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to like,
Were you tempted though? Or you did do a bit of it, right? Or
yeah, I mean, but yeah, so I didn't do that, like probably 5 or 6 a day, if that, and
right. And
because
what's
I
your take?
were-
What's your take?
Yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh no,
No, just in this whole kind of celebrity doctor status. Like, I'd love to hear your insight because you hear, like, I'll hear on the news and like, over the years, lots of people that are, either mini celebrities or bigger celebrities. And it's always kind of a little bit of a calling card. Well, I still see patients, I still see patients. So you have someone that's like, on every talk show, like, it's like, when do you have time to see patients? And then I still see patients and it's a little bit, well, I want to stay in touch and I want to see what the latest things are. Or is it, it sometimes feel like it's just a soundbite just so you can say it on your interview. Like, what's your take on that celebrity doc?
It's, to me, it's like, you're either all in or all out. Like,
Okay.
I don't want to go to a cardiologist that does like, 2 procedures a month, right? I want to go
Right.
for
Right.
like
But
30,
yeah.
a
Right.
week, right? So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I always get a little freaked out when docs are like, yeah, doing things on the side, and it's just like,
And right.
do one or the other. That's my philosophies.
Okay.
Jade, so you started this kind of combining, I'll say, digital patient acquisition with a house call. But unless I'm going absolutely crazy, which I think is when we met, because I had the Health
Ah,
2.0 in New York City, which I started
yeah,
in 2008, right?
yeah,
Called Matthew Holt. Hey, can you
yeah.
lead the chapter? And I even think you spoke at it. It was much smaller than the conference, but I do remember. I think you had like then you started growing, like you had other docs join you, right? So maybe just and but I'm like it's so
What
vague and
happened?
it's so far
Yeah,
in
yeah,
my brain that you know,
yeah.
kind of like what was the growth and what are some of the points that you were like, oh shit, right? And like and what's happening now, or I don't know, just
Right.
walk us through that scaling
So
Journey.
experience.
one of those 7.5 million visitors was a guy named Nat Philly, and he's an entrepreneur based out of Quebec, and he had started a company, sold it for a couple 100 million to Cardinal Health,
Mhm.
and he was like looking for the next big thing, and he thought like putting a nutritionist on the phone would be that, so very forward thinking guy, very sweet guy. And he just came down. He's like, I read this article about you. I'm jumping out of plane tonight. Let's get a beer. Right. And, it's an hour and a half flight from Quebec to New York. So we got together and he was just like, hey, I think what you're doing is super cool. Let's kind of build a business around it. And I was like, well, the thing that would be really cool is if there was a physical place that you could use as more of like a confirmatory thing and talk to people online. And then when
Okay.
just come on in, you know? So we came up with this genius business model of $35 a month to be a member and I think like $100 a visit or something like that, and built out a Hello Health in a physical place and I would say it's kind of one of the first sort of cloud-based EMRs. Like Practice Fusion was coming online around then too.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay.
And so we built our own technology from the ground up because obviously in early 2008, it didn't exist. And
Right.
so physical place plus a brand plus technology. And, we hired doctors, raised a bunch of money and so,
What did you raise? I mean, I'm sure we can look it up, but just
yeah. Oh, I don't even know. It's probably not because it's before
oh
Crunchbase
yeah.
probably,
Okay.
so yeah, we raised about, I think, 30 million. Then it's huge. The interesting thing about Nat was he was very like there's a sort of Canadian mafia, startup mafia out there, like what we had down here, right? So he was funded.
Right.
So our investors were like the founder of Rocks, the founder of
Okay.
the Flower Fitness, and the founder of Cirque du Soleil. Those are
Oh,
Okay.
fascinating.
yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of like friend money, but also institutional.
Okay.
And what was, I'll say, the end result, right? Because obviously you've then went on further. So how long did this, from the single practice to,
Mhm.
getting a bunch of money and what was that journey like and some kind of oh shit moments
What
maybe?
happened?
And let's see. We built our first practice on Barry and Arthate in Williamsburg. It was small. Built a second practice in the West Village, and then the third practice was Qualcomm on their corporate campus. And so then we became like kind of an employer focused, on-site
Type.
operator using the technology we built for all the other practices. And yeah, so did that. And then I think about a year and a half later, Nat and I just had different opinions around like the strategy. I was sort of like, let's go the practice fusion route. And he was like,
Okay.
like the traditional EMR, sales route. And
Okay.
you hard to sort of scale out kind of blockbusters versus Netflix. And I kind of wanted to go the Netflix route this more blockbuster route. And it was just
Okay.
like, you know, well,
But the product you were selling ultimately wasn't a product, it was a service that was powered
mm,
by a product that you kind
yeah,
of built from scratch because there was no alternatives really, right? So,
right.
but either one of you guys were saying, well, let's go EMR or let's go, as you called it, practice fusion, the modern EMR, right?
Yeah,
Right.
We're not so modern anymore, right? I forget who ate them, but
right.
so at the end of the day, it's really the number of people you serve, not necessarily how you sold the software, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, so, and then that became interesting because like, after I left, we eventually just kind of like shuttered the practices. So think of One Medical, right? And they were getting
Yeah.
started around the same time. And so we
Right.
just go like, well, we don't want to be One Medical. We want to be more of an EMR. And
Okay.
so there weren't any EMRs back in the day that focused on primarily online conversations. It was
Right.
all, hey, you're showing up, in this physical place. We're going to have a 15-minute visit and you need to document it. You need to bill insurance. So the sort of thread that not tried to needle that not tried to thread was how can we find a home for highly communicative practices that don't take insurance? So
Okay.
eventually it ended up happening that like Hello Health, still alive today, is very popular EMR in Australia
Hmm.
and
Okay.
also several countries
Plot
in the
twist.
Middle East. Yeah,
Plot
right.
twist.
No,
Interesting.
it's a full-fledged EMR. It still operates, and some of the DPC practices use
Okay.
it. And so
Okay.
product practice, what this started in 2008, and it's still kicking.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Amazing.
and your thoughts, I mean, we kind of touched on, primary care and your background, right? I mean, everything I hear from the docs, nobody wants to be a primary care doc in US today. Just
Yeah,
it's underpaid, overworked, and you're working with all kinds of EMR systems all day long, and that's it. So just, before we continue on your journey, I'm just curious on your thoughts. And as you mentioned, DPC, right? There's companies like Hint Health and others that are sort of pulling docs together, putting them back in control, for lack of a better term.
yeah,
So just curious on your thought and observation on the market.
yeah. I mean, I don't think docs hate the practice of medicine. I think they hate just like all the nonsense they have to do. It's. I think I read this book called The Collapse of Complex Societies, and the kind of takeaway was like, in the beginning, societies come together and they collaborate, and there's a lot of value added things through that collaboration. But one day it flips, and you wake up, and 90% of everything around you is there to maintain complexity and not add value.
Hmm.
It's the
Right.
doctor's job right now is maintaining complexity, right? And not
Right.
everybody needs to maintain complexity.
Right.
Well, I think there are people that enjoy maintaining complexity,
Yeah,
and that's their job, right? And becomes
right,
so.
Yeah.
It's almost like the small startup and the big corporate, right? Like that's kind
Right.
of the
It's like, yay, a new compliance program.
yeah, right. So, and they
uh,
felt so bad about that. So it's like, I think that's the reason why. It's like, you take these doctors and give them a DB practice, or you give them like a virtual primary care practice, and you give them like the freedom to just skip all the bullshit and just like communicate and solve problems. Like, I've
Right.
never seen a doctor that like hates that. And if they do, it's like,
fair,
And you
fair.
shouldn't be practicing yet.
yeah,
Right.
All right, so you exited
Hello,
amicably,
health. All right.
Hello Health,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
a year later,
And
2 years later, 7 years later, what's the?
then,
Right.
well, then Humana hired me to come down and talk to their executive team about like what the internet is. And, it's 2009, you know?
Yeah.
So you sat in front of a bunch of complexity managers, and
Yeah. And it's
With like
funny because it
a
was
video of Al Gore. Or
it was cool because it was like the whole executive team, like CEO, everybody. And one of the guys there, his named Grant Harrison, who was the chief innovation officer of Humana. He was hired by Humana because prior to that, he started Virgin Pulse, which became, or Virgin Health Miles, which became Virgin Pulse. But prior to that, he was the founder of the Tesco Club Card. Oh, yeah. The Tesco Club Card is, if people don't know, it's kind of the first time that a retailer tied you to your transactions. They give you a little key fob, and then they were
Right.
like, you can buy this. So the next week, I'm going to send them coupons to buy more, you know?
Right.
And so somebody had to do that concept for the first time. Now all of a sudden, there were key fobs for every single place.
Everybody and their
There,
mother had one. Yep.
yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Humana was like, hey, you're kind of the king of loyalty. Can you make our members loyal to Human? You know?
Hmm.
Okay.
So anyway, he was on his way out of Humana because the answer was no. And
Okay.
he's kind of behind it over like making fun of the whole thing. So
Right.
he and I, we got together and just became kind of besties. Started like a consultancy just to help similar like Humana like brands to kind of understand like, what's this new patient look like? What are they interested in? How do they communicate? So we worked with Sanofi in Paris and a lot of the NHS in the UK. We worked with Cecile Richards actually from Planned Parenthood, who just passed away this week. And really, we constructed like the Planned Parenthood strategy to like connect with the kids. That was the rise of Tumblr at the time. So we basically like married Planned Parenthood and Tumblr together, and Planned Parenthood now had to like engage with like, they had like 10 million followers.
And how much of those projects where you would kind of allude to creativity versus data mining, behavior data mining, or both, or
It was more creativity. I
yeah.
mean, there was some data, but like not a lot, you know. I think Brad and I both like were kind of like looking to how do we inspire people to be healthy,
Yep.
versus like solve a business problem. And I think, Grant and I are still talking about maybe relaunching that and like refocusing this on to be much stronger at like solving business problems and like pie in the sky healthy ideas.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. And
Okay.
then
So
so okay. So then from there we're going into because I saw Sherpa. Is that how does Sherpa?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like 2012. Grant and I, we're still besties. We talk every few days and like, um, but we kind of went our separate ways. I got sick of kind of like doing the project thing and like just seeing it kind of like get 60% built and then too much of a, I don't know, artist perfectionist or whatever to be like,
you want to
I wanna
see it
build
to completion.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Yeah. You're not a
So
consultant. You don't give other people what to do and walk away.
yeah, I like to build things and like bring them alive, and yeah. So again, I was still like the internet doctor of New York City. So like all the companies founded in New York City, like Tumblr, Foursquare, like Meetup, Etsy, they all knew me, right? And I was really tight with David Karp, who started Tumblr. Tumblr to me was like the best thing still on the internet. That was amazing.
I was an avid user for quite a while. I
I
just wish I
mean,
migrated all my stuff.
yeah, right. It sucks because I wish David's vision of the internet like took off instead of like Zuckerberg's, and like I think it would be in a different place. Honestly, it's a weird like thing to say, but anyway, point is, David was a friend, and I said, "Hey, David, like you got about 70 employees now. What if we gave your employees an email and a phone number, and there's a doctor on the other end, you know?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Well, yeah, obviously, so."
Yeah.
We charged like $50 an employee or something like that. I hired a doctor and, you know, then I was like, well, there's revenue and there's kind of proof of a business model. And so then really with Tim O'Reilly and O'Reilly Alpha Tech Ventures, Bryce Roberts, I was just like, hey, Bryce, can you throw a couple million at this? And then first round capital and then collaborative funds. So we raised like, I think, I don't know, 5 million or so to get Sherpa off the ground. Sherpa was kind of the pioneer of virtual primary care. Prior to this, like virtual primary or telehealth was very like transactional. It was like, video chat with a stranger in 10 minutes and then we'll be able to talk to them again. So can't really do much for this types of conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you said, hey, every time you fire up the app, you're going to work with the same doctor, the same team, and they can prescribe, they can order tests, they can order imaging, refer you to a specialist and follow up with that specialist and just kind of like wrap their arms around everything that like, you need in your situation and your employer pays for it. It's great.
Yep. So employer paid for, they're paying the membership fee, they paid the $50 and they redo, it's like having the practice on site, like what you
Yeah.
were doing before with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, totally. But it was like, it was never physical. It was, you might work with the
Right.
same doc for 5 years and never meet him in person except for like the health fair we'd go to,
Yeah.
with the year or so.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So
what were some learnings? I know, and I forget the guy's name. I almost jumped on one of the calls, the care ops. I saw you were on it.
Rick.
Rick, yeah, Rick. What are some learnings in kind of care ops, right? And again, you sort of led the way in this virtual primary care, right? To go from a non-sticky episodal relationship to a sticky relationship, right? I mean, there's so much logistics that goes in from a demand supply managing. So just kind of curious on your lessons learned in, prior to the exit, which I also want to talk
Yeah,
about.
I mean, it's interesting because it's about when you don't want one person to be the bottleneck. You don't want one doctor to be the bottleneck. If that doctor's sick or out on vacation, like your care can't stop, you know? So then you have to be like, well, how does a team of doctors operate? And at the time, Slack didn't exist, right? So we didn't have a bunch of like sort of group collaboration, asynchronous messaging platforms to kind of learn from, you know?
Yep.
A lot of those kind of like early IM were kind of like one-on-one conversation. There wasn't a ton of group functionality. So we had to kind of invent that in a lot of ways. And the reason was because like, well, how's the care team operate as a team? And what was fascinating about that was, well, the patient has a problem and they write in. Remember, like 95% of all interactions
We're
were
acing.
written. So it's kind of
Yep.
more like email, but kind of like in a thread.
Yeah.
So, you write in and you might be working with one doctor throughout the day and then she goes home and you've got another challenge. And so you write in another time. Well, that doctor kind of pops in. The new doctor pops into that thread, reads the whole thread. And then like nobody has privileged information because, it's just reading. And so then they take up the next steps. What's interesting about that is like, you know, gosh, it's kind of like a doctor. I don't know, like anybody can just pop into a conversation and be like, I don't agree with that. Let's do something else,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so
Hmm.
that was a big learning that we had to like kind of figure out was like, if you don't agree with like what previous doctors have recommended, talk to the previous doctor before you talk to the patient. If the
Right.
patient
Right.
schizophrenic and weird, you know?
Right.
But how much of that were you seeing? Just curious, right? I mean, obviously, as you grew with volume, it was more and more. But I would argue, I mean, listen, we all got shit throughout the day, 24 hours a day. But, there's probably a percentage of that, right? And as soon as you started seeing that, just like reacting to a process change. So to your point, well, just talk to the other doc, if it's an emergency.
But the doc's not there
Yeah,
because the doc's off. Doc's
Yeah,
asleep
yeah.
at that time, right?
right. And so that was what it was. It was interesting because the thing that I learned there was like the vast majority of people care more about getting that problem solved than you do about a relationship.
Right.
Now, if you do both, that's awesome. And that
Hmm.
was our in many ways. It was like, essentially what we did was we kept patient panels small. And so say a group of like 6,000 patients would work with a group of 3 doctors, you know?
Right.
And so
Right.
90% of the time you're working with your doctor, but 10% of the time that doctor was still adding value and your
Right.
issue was still progressing and being solved. And so, yeah, it
Right.
was just sort of like, people want relationships or transactions. And like the answer is like, well, kind of it depends on it's a hybrid.
Right. So interesting, like in the Irish setting where I live,
Mhm.
you struggle to get a second opinion.
Interesting.
And when you go to specialists because of the size of the country and the fact that you might have, say in a country, say within the area of cancer treatment, you might have 20 top oncologists in the whole country, maybe a lot more than that, but maybe 20 that kind of deal. And then for your subspecialty, it might be smaller. And then
Mhm.
you take it to a geography and there might be 2 oncologists in the west of Ireland, and and they have gone to school together and worked together, and their whole system is set up. So then you go and you're like, I need a second opinion. Your only chance is to go to Dublin, and your better chance is to go to London, right? So because giving a second opinion of something so serious is they're going to do it in a very careful way. They might give it to you, but to give a true second opinion, like, should I be doing this or not? Very difficult. And it's just the size of the community.
Well, and that's to me like what I think is so powerful about that type of model. It's like it's a hive mind rather than a single mind. And
Right.
so, the best way to catch mistakes is to have two people thinking about it. Think about like pair programming and things like that. It's
Right.
it's that same concept, just applying it
Right.
up, you know.
So you
But yeah,
you
but
mean
it
to
kind of
tell
moves
me?
back to the hive,
Yeah.
but go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, you mean to tell me that all the doctors are not like Dr. House that just solves everything himself?
Right. And he doesn't seem like super worried about the relationship.
And so, but back to, at what point, as you were kind of leading the organization, how big did you guys scale before the sale? What is it, to Crossover, right?
Yeah.
Which, side note, Jim, if you remember, Scott Shreve was actually on the shot
Totally.
with us.
Yeah.
I don't remember when, but a while back. And I think to date,
Way
he's
back.
still the only guest that neither one knew of, right? It
Right.
was John Halleck,
Yeah.
who was there for a couple of months, or I don't remember the
Yeah.
timing.
At crossover.
That kind of, we were friends with John Halleck over there. But so anyway, just a side note that Scott was on the show, but was the only guest that neither one of us knew. So it was kind of like interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so at what point did you say, hey, looking for an exit, or did Scott approach you, or kind of what's the scale of the business at that point in time?
Yeah. So the best way for me to explain it is like we've cared for about 30,000 people over our lifetime. We existed for about 8.5 years or so. We raised like, I don't know, about 12 million to do that. So I was pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
to get to that. The big thing was it's a sales company. It's not a care delivery company. Selling it to employers. I was the main salesperson because, it's a new thing. Like founders are obviously the best.
Yeah. Founder-led sales.
Yeah, I know. Right?
Yep.
Like God's seeing in that same situation now, right? It's like you gotta there's some companies that just the founder can never step out, right? So yeah, we did a series C, Series A, got SoftBank going for Series A. Series B was like this close to happening, the long story, but didn't happen. That was UPMC that was coming in to invest.
Okay.
And 24 hours before it was an investor nightmare. So
Wow.
Okay.
we had almost zero money in the bank and, a team. So, what had to happen was
And how big was the team?
the team at the time was about 25,
Okay.
Well, you got 25 families, or right,
Totally.
depending on you. So yeah.
100%. But the thing was, well, the company, the doctors were like, we're not giving up. We love this. We had no money in the bank, but they're like, we're going to keep working. We don't want any disruption to the practice. And what we did was, we just had a bunch of money out because whenever you're VC funded, you don't, get too excited about collections because you have a bunch of things. We'd been a bunch of money out, and then we just restructured and, became a revenue dependent company. And like, I loved it more since because it just forced harder decisions. You didn't do stupid things.
So it was more of a cash flow issue. I mean, maybe you weren't quite profitable, but much more of a cash flow issue than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that like at the time learned a lot of things. At the time would not be like the world's best CEO by any means, you know? And so, just kind of like threw myself in the fire and like had to get serious because the company would go under if like we didn't just like focus on new sales, focus on different types of sales. We started selling into health plans and things. So
Okay.
we ended up like rolling much like sort of, I don't know, in a different way
Thought it. Right.
by like kind of pivoting into the health plan world.
What's this saying? Scarcity breeds creativity, right?
Yeah, totally. We also opened it up direct to consumer, and that was pretty cool. So like, people would leave Tumblr and be like, I worked with Dr. Ganella for 5 years. I want to keep her, but that was like
Yeah.
a huge revenue line for us.
Mm.
Yeah. But anyway, that was about 3 years. And then Scott just called me up one day. He's like, what you doing on there? And we'd known each other. It's like 2007, my initial house call practice. And so, he was in New York and we met and, we just sort of thought that the future's hybrid, not, he was building websites and near
Yeah.
sites,
Right.
not much online communication. And I was building all the online communication models. Yeah, they were really a product company. They had, I think, 2 or 3 engineers. And so we
Yeah.
built a product team to about 20.
Okay.
And I joined and basically built their platform that powers their today.
But assumingly a lot of that foundation was Sherpa, right?
No, I mean, no, their bread and butter is still on-site near sites, right? It's just, hey, Facebook has employees, not just in the park. They have them all over
Right.
America. Now, all of a sudden, every employee at Facebook can be a crossover patient, not just the ones that live around the
No, I
campus.
I
Right.
get it, right? But in order for you to facilitate the video and virtual discussions, you had a, CRM, PRM, EMR, however, whatever
Yeah.
the term you use. And Scott
Yeah.
was using something in the offices, right? And so I think it's that
Relation.
combo,
Yeah.
right? The linkage of kind of the patient records, for lack of a better term, right? Okay.
Well, Elation obviously does. At the time, I don't know what they're doing now, but it
Yeah.
didn't have a great patient experience. Also, like none of that stuff's built to power multi-state practices,
Mm.
you know?
Oh yeah.
So think of what I built as the layer that rides on top of the patient experience and the doctor's like care. And then the
Right.
EMR kind of like there for like just the necessary like ordering and, resulting and like that type of stuff. But all that communication and documentation happen mostly in the platform.
If you were
Right.
starting another practice from scratch, would you still build from scratch, or do you think there's enough modern platforms and I don't know, like Erica Jane, Get
Top on
Healthy,
top of it.
there's Compass, there's a bunch of stuff out there that supposedly plug and play. Would you build on top of those, or would you still think that a huge asset is the platform?
That's a good question. I think, I think number one, like the online communication platforms out there right now fundamentally miss the mark around point communication and the process of that communication. Right now, it's like, how do we reinvent kind of, or like, how do we bring like WhatsApp to health? You know,
Yeah.
it's like, wait, and okay, if I have to ask you 20 questions as a doctor, that's 40 back and forths via
Hmm.
these.
Right.
I need to be able to fire off just like, a 20 question, like sort of card that you can answer all 20 questions at once and then send them back to me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The systems that I've seen out there have not been like focusing on reducing the amount of back and forths via like
Yeah.
structured global processes. And so
Right.
and the most expensive thing that you have is like doctors and their salary and their time. And the platforms that are out there are not optimizing for that. Like
Okay.
I still think like, yeah, I mean, I haven't seen one that's like, helping me solve the most expensive thing. Like,
Interesting. You would think after now decades and decades, right?
right.
When kind of the EMRs, the ACA, 40 billion flown into this
Right.
software market, you would think, I mean, I know there was
Nailed it.
always these complaints that, the software companies not listening to the actual docs practicing. But again, I can see that from an Epic or even Cerner, but some of the more modern ones, I would think that they've reorganized themselves into the design thinking mode of the actual user of the platform again.
You
Interesting.
would think so. But at the same time, it's interesting because like not a lot of docs are like, they're just trying to like kind of quickly message with patients. They're not trying to
Right.
be like, it's almost an adjunct in a lot of ways
Mm.
to like their other practice. And I don't know, I find it super interesting that 98.6 healthy, they have not built, what we built was basically think of a thread and then think of like cards within the thread. A
Right.
card is like,
Right.
a question set card. Okay, click into this card, answer the 20 questions, hit submit. And now that card gets
Yeah.
updated information. Another card is a prescription card. Okay,
Right.
click in its prescription, read up on what it is, choose your pharmacy within the prescription, and then like that workflow is just automatic. And doctors don't have to go back and forth about, well, where should I send this? The patient gets to choose, you know?
Right.
So think about all those like predictable processes and you just make them cards. And all of a sudden, a thread that would have been 200 if you're using like an LP or a WhatsApp or type experience, it's now down to like 20, you know?
Right. Right.
And and that's kind of like, and that's the frustrating thing because like everybody's like, hey, do you have to build your own or do you use something off the shelf? And it's like, well, what's your IP? What's your biggest expense?
Right.
And if I can build that system,
Yeah.
just got done building that at Sana, and we built it with 2.5 engineers, and it took about 7 months. You know,
Yeah, 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 yeah. And like, what's it? And I was just, I was reading your your blog before coming on the call, talking about designing, like designing in 5-year increments. Like that was your thematic of your piece. But so I have a thesis now that all software needs to be rewritten.
Mm,
Like we're going through a fundamental rewrite of like almost all software in some way, or augmentation, or because of the tools that exist today that didn't exist 10 years ago. Maybe not all software, but like a good amount of it. So like coming back to Eugene's question, like if you were building tools to do what you're talking about now, you just have different tools available if you started right now today.
yeah, I mean, think about it. Like back in like Sherpa days, you know, there's roughly 300 different symptoms that humans have, which is interesting. My shoulder
Right.
hurts, my skin itches, and so there's not a lot, right? So there's 20 magic questions around each symptom.
Okay.
That every doctor to ask in the same way because it's just the most clear question of and so the point is like that stuff's generative now. Like,
Right.
yeah, you can train it, but like you don't have to create that too much. All this stuff. Like if you ask a doctor or if you ask like, ChatGPT, like, hey, I'm working with a 22-year-old female who's college educated. Explain to her why she doesn't need antibiotics for, bronchitis,
Mm.
you know,
Right.
like you kind of like have it do it once, prove it and done. And so, yeah, I mean, like, if things are communication based that it's written, like, holy shit, the amount of like efficiencies you get from exactly what you're talking about, just like rewriting based on today's possibilities. So
Well,
brilliant.
Right.
and not to mention that even the 2.5 developers that you mentioned earlier, right? Like there's copilots, right? There's coding copilots where it speeds them
Mhm.
up and quote unquote best practices that are learned from all the millions and probably billions lines of code that have been out there, right? So, I know our team copilot left and right? I mean, we're still smallest
Yeah.
and mighty team, but
Right. Right. Like if you just we came from JP Morgan and we're being driven around in the Waymos you were just talking about before you came on, and you're like, okay, this thing's flipping me around San Francisco streets.
Mhm.
Like, and all the billboards are saying replace humans. So,
Well, what's wild about that is like I spoke at Google Zeitgeist back in 2010, which is like their interim tech conference for their like biggest vendors and clients. And they were giving away like for the speakers, they were giving away like self-driving Google cars just to like take a ride in around Phoenix.
hmm,
And so I did that in
yeah.
2010. It was like Waymo stuff, like in 2010,
Right.
you know,
Right.
took this long to bring it to market as fast. No.
well, and interestingly enough, it's less about the technology, it's back to the organizing processes, right? And look, I mean, to be fair, they're all questions that you ponder, right? Like what's an ethical, human makes the decision, who to run over, God forbid, right? Or, how does the car make the decision and who is at fault and liabilities? And that's what dragged it
Right.
out, right? Not the technology itself.
It's a political problem, right? Tech
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for
Yes.
sure. But so we're sort of getting into the AI territory, and I think where you and I kind of reconnected. I saw you at the bar. I forget which conference. I walked in with Steady MD guys, Guy
I think
Friedman, and
that
you
was
were
in
with the Nabla guys.
Nashville, I think, wasn't it?
Mm.
Yes, yes. I think it was Nashville. Yeah, but curious on I don't know if you're still doing work with Nabla, but it feels like, every day you wake up, there's another AI assistant to the docs. It is a crowded space. And, my curiosity is what's actually kind of working and what's not working on the ground, and put the politics and all that shit aside from, healthcare systems making decisions one way or another due to investments or whatever else, right? It just, there's all these conversations we get pinged. I mean, we run a health coaching company, and, the first question, we were just at CES, was, "Oh, is that an AI coach?" And, our first question back is, "Well, would you prefer to talk to an AI coach or a human coach?" Right? And everybody answers human. So,
Yeah,
um,
sure.
I'm just kind of curious what you see in the space as augmenting doctors. And if we rewind back probably a decade plus ago, if you remember, Kostler got a lot of shit from the medical community at one point, right? And
Yeah.
where are we now today?
Hmm. Good question. Keep in mind, my relationship with Nabla, they brought me in whenever they had a care platform that looked very similar to Sherpa's platform.
Got it.
And they were like, hey, we think this could be a business. I was very excited because I was like, oh man, if I could like have a platform like Sherpa, I could create like multiple practices with different payers across America. It'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So they were just, why don't you come on and be like, lead this product out? In the process, I was just like, hey, like, there's not, I would love to have this. There's very few others that would love to have this, you know? So you should like just abandon this platform and go all in on this thing that didn't even have a name at the time. Could eventually be not like Copilot, you know? So I stayed on board for like the early, probably 6 months,
Yeah.
the launch of Copilot. And like, they're just such a sweet company. I mean, Alex is just he's a great guy. Lauren is a great, I mean, they're just all just lovely people. And so, my job was basically to say, hey guys, like, this is awesome. It's magic. I took it into my like vet with my like, dog, and it still worked like magic. And I'm like, this thing is amazing. You guys have to realize it's not about the tech, it's about the sales team, and like, that's what's so fascinating. But I don't think people realize that like what you're actually creating is not, a healthcare service, is a marketing company. It's not an AI stripe, it's a sales team, you know? And so that's, I don't know. My heart's not in it to be like, how can I make the best sales team ever? But
Yeah, no, listen, and my question was actually less about Nablight. I was just trying to connect
yeah,
the dots from
right.
AI and where we kind of reconnected relatively recently. I
Yeah,
mean, interesting path
yeah, yeah,
there. More so, again, just we know it's not all buzz, right? And
yeah,
hype.
for sure.
There's some real value. But just traditionally, healthcare moves like molasses, right? Like it doesn't adopt quick enough, right? So again, I don't know how much you're seeing, quote unquote, in the front lines or talking to the docs. Where I'm trying to grasp is what's actually happening on the ground, right? Like, you know, is this being used as a co-pilot, and not Nabla specifically, just a set of competitors' products. I don't care about the logos, right? And some are better than others, I'm sure, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big thing. It's like, gosh, if you can get doctors to change their behavior, like how do doctors change behavior? Like, I guess it's just because it's that holy shit magic moment, where it's like, oh, I used to have to do this thing, but now I don't have to. The challenge in so many ways is like, I always told folks at Nabo, like your competition isn't the EMR, the template, right?
Right.
And so docs are using templates, they always have them. So are they changing their behavior from the template to a copilot? Like, yeah, they are. There's certain early adopters, and the
Sure.
younger doctors are for sure doing that. If it integrates well with the EMR, yeah. But I mean, is it 1% of visits, or is it, 70% of visits? And I think Benal team would probably tell you that, but I don't know
yeah,
that.
no, I'm not asking you to
Yeah.
disclose. Just
Yeah.
trying to again, right? At like some of these crazy valuations that you wake up to, and the math is not mathing from. I think the total population of docs and I would, let's put in, nursing and other clinicians, and it's not mathing to me, right? Because what am I paying per seat or per transaction to make a company worth X hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions, right?
Right.
So that's where my
It
head
seems
is.
like a
It's
hard,
just not.
it seems like a hard behavioral challenge, like a change behavior challenge to solve. If you think about like the real adoption, like if I have to, if like in your first job, in your first job doing preventative medicine, where you had to crunch through data sets, like massive, massive data sets, and then AI can come in as a
I,
co-pilot
I
and
think I
crush
have a
that out for
solution.
you.
I think every doctor needs a health coach assigned to them to help them with behavior change. There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Throw that into the company.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
sell that service to Nabla.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know. I'm like,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, I'm just kind of, I don't know, you could say burned out or whatever. Yeah. You've been in the space and you understand, you guys both understand for so long. It's like you see all these things come and go. And I guess
Right,
lesson learned for me is just like what really matters, what cuts through the trends. And,
right.
and I'm in a loss for that. It's not like I had some big answer, you know?
Mm,
And the sad part in all of this, right? I mean, I'm not even talking about the multi-trillion system, right? Just the cost to keep increasing. We're seeing in the front lines, and we're a non-clinical service, the stuff that people coming in with, right? Everything from mental health, obesity, tons of comorbidities, and younger, right? So we're not getting healthier as a society with all the stuff that we're inventing and all the stuff that been, put in place. And so I can see the kind of your comment on burnout, right? Because as an innovator, you want to make a difference, right? You said it earlier. That's the goal, right? Make a difference. And when you're
Yeah. Right.
seeing that people are just getting sicker, younger generation is getting cancers earlier. I mean, I can keep going and going and going, right? And so question is, how do we really reset, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, my strategy over the years was to find like little utopias that don't play by the traditional rules and build out something really like lovely and beautiful for that smaller population of all of America, right? But it's, I'm proud there's probably about 500,000 patients that are currently getting care in the care models that I've built, most of that's through crossover. Like the point is, like the world, nobody believes it until you show it,
mhm.
it-
you know? And, whenever you're talking about like designs that you're thinking about for even technology, it's like, well, nobody believes it until they see like screenshots, you
right,
know?
right, right.
Nobody can understand it until they see screenshots.
Yep.
So
It's
it's
life. Yeah,
be
yeah.
simple stuff. And that's been that's my goal, just to be like, how do you show people stuff that the world should see and that should exist? And don't focus on the frustrations of trying to fix the system.
So
Right.
we're the Instagram generation, all of us now, right? We just want to see instantly an image of what it's going to
Yeah.
look like. What's the, utopia
Yeah.
look
Even also,
like?
it's this kind of this health artist, right? Like the artist paints something that you couldn't have visualized on your own. You're painting it for them. You can see the little things.
And the thing, when you see these people conversing with, your team, your coaches, like you see that real people are getting value. And like, that's powerful. And
Listen, it is, right? And Marina and
yeah,
I wake up every morning and we see this is how many people our coaches are going to help. And by the way, we're helping coaches, right? Just because, our
Mm,
whole model is based on contracting coaches. They're great coaches. They're just not great salespeople. So don't get me wrong. And this is why we get up now for 5 years in a row and enjoy every freaking moment of it. It just, as a system, right? We've touched maybe thousands of patients, but there's 300 million just in US alone. So it's fascinating. Was it? We
It's
were
happening, man. It's breaking,
no, but
breaking. It's breaking now. Yeah,
I keep having the same conversation with lots of entrepreneurs around just
sure.
even I think today earlier around where does the line cross between persistence and stupidity,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Well, also, I think it's interesting. Like you were saying, Jay, when I was reading that, like this idea that a lot of the businesses that you've helped build, and I've been in that situation. I think Eugene's been there. That they're not traditionally VC funded businesses because they don't have the hockey stick kind of, moment they have. Or even if you go into other hardware, you're seeing Waymos driving around 10 years ago, but we're only seeing it in one city publicly, so it's like it was happening. And that feels like a lot of cases that there's a lot of these like clever technologies, and they don't have that hockey stick transaction that allows a natural kind of VC funder to put $1 billion into it and scale it everywhere. Yeah.
And that's because, pesky humans are dependent. Healthcare is very much dependent on the human, right? Yeah. And it's like, that doesn't scale too far, so
Mm.
it's okay. And it's like, what I think is so fascinating is like, I don't know, I remember listening to this podcast. There was a guy who's been doing like gun safety research for like 40 years. And
Right.
the interviewer was just like, man, you spent 40 years doing this, like,
I know.
we're dying left and right over here in America from COVID. And he's like, you can't do that. You can't get under my skin. Like, I know that these things take forever. Smoking, the Surgeon General came out with like 1962 or whatever. So being's bad for you.
Right.
It took 50 years, 60 years to get down to like 10% after 50% of adults smoked. And so
Right.
it's just like, just wait for the timing to come together. Wait for AI to be invented. Wait for all this stuff like, the puzzle pieces are coming. But like,
Right.
we're just those like doofuses in the front lines for 20 years, just banging our heads. And 20 years from now, like, that'll be worse.
Right.
Jay, I don't know
Like,
if ChatGPT hallucinated, and this is the stuff that we did a little bit of prep work, but one of the things that I asked, give me kind of few quotes from Jay, and you tell us if you actually said this or it was a hallucination, but Jay Parkinson on healthcare complexity, quote, "Collapse is simply the last remaining method of simplification."
for sure.
Okay.
I mean,
So that was you.
it goes back to like the collapse of complex societies, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the principles of that for sure. The only way for it to fix itself is to like blow up and like restart.
Yeah.
And given what we've
Absolutely.
just seen with United Healthcare CEO, and who knows what the new administration will do, because I haven't heard, I actually listened to the inaugural speech twice, didn't hear anything about healthcare, just I had to make sure that I listened, which was painful, but
Still
I
thinking
did.
of a plan. Yeah.
Say it again.
Still thinking of a plan. The notion of a plan.
Yeah, the notion of the
Right.
plan. So is that like, what's your thoughts on your quote and where we are as a healthcare system?
It's a scary thing. And this is one of the most depressing things I'll probably say, but like healthcare is what, 23, 24% of our GDP right now, right? The 2008 collapse involved about, I think, 1.5% of the GDP, and like messing around with that 1.5% had a cascade effect. What if you, with what if you make healthcare 20% more efficient? All of a sudden, 5% of our GDP goes away. How do you sort of manage that, in the markets?
Yeah.
I
I
never
think
thought
that's
of it that way.
scary. Yeah, I think it's scary to think about it that way, but it's sort of like, I think healthcare, it's going to have to collapse. It's going to have to be simplified in some way. And like,
Mm.
I'm no Trumper, but at the same time, there's I think he represents is just like, an anti-establishment,
Anti-establishment, right?
Sure.
and I think propping up this like thing that's going to have to collapse
Right.
is a great move. And like, the sooner you can do it, the sooner you can blow that up so that like people like say if healthcare was designed by millennials or Gen Zs, like what would it look like? The sooner that can
Right.
like, the better for our country.
Right.
Interesting.
Awesome.
Let's turn this onto some kind of positive note. Not to start thinking about it. I'm gonna have nightmares tonight, but I don't know, Jim. I mean, we can go. There's so many other questions I want to ask, but I think I love how
Turn it over.
the famous kind of last question of Jim Joyce.
The
So
framing.
the framing
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. So we're gonna rewind you back in time, and we're gonna rewind you forward here, Jay. So we're gonna kind of put you through a little time machine, but you get a message through a very slick Slack platform that you're messaging on with this group, and you've been invited to speak at John Hopkins, an event that's kind of sponsored by Preventative Care Group, and they're looking for Missourian golfing entrepreneurial doctors to talk about how the U.S. healthcare system, despite going through near collapse, has managed to ratchet down the cost of healthcare to 10% of the GDP, but it's led to productivity everywhere. And a lot of this foundationally has come from these 500,000 patients in healthcare systems being able to access healthcare in this novel way through design thinking. And they've asked you to come in and give the keynote, and you're up giving the keynote, and in the audience are, fellow golfing entrepreneurial doctors from Missouri. And I was at the event, and we're talking, and this young man looks across the group, he's a well-dressed, fashionable guy who just says, he sees you and he just comes running towards you, and he stops you and he says, "So Jay, you don't understand." He goes, "I grew up in Missouri and I built the golf course in my front yard. I ended up moving to Williamsburg, and I just started in my own preventative care, virtual care company." And you look at that young version of yourself. What's the one piece of advice you'd give him?
Yeah, the good one. Well, the presentation there was phenomenal. So thank you for that. The one piece of advice I would just say, like, just patience. I think put your head down, be patient. Nobody, if you're like kind of first mover or something like that, they don't like you too much. But like stick with your convictions. And, one of those convictions is always be learning, you know?
Yeah.
So don't stick with the conviction of you got to be doing the same thing over and over. Right. So I think it's just patience and be convicted and keep learning.
Love it. Love it.
Perfect.
Jay, thanks for being our guinea pig. So we'll, to all of our listeners and viewers, please feed us back if you prefer the 35, 40-minute, or you can hang with us for the full 2 hours, because we have some amazing guests that are lined up for the long form shows.
Yeah.
So again, Jay, thank you for joining us.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
And to all the viewers and listeners, hit subscribe, pass it on, and probably see you next week, maybe the week after.